mic. Yeah. All I need is one mic. Yeah. All I need is one mic.
Hey everybody, welcome back to One Mic, where I watch shit so you don't have to. And today I'm here to talk about Season 3, Episode 6 of HBO's Succession, entitled What It Takes. I have a couple of thoughts as far as the title goes. The first is that when I was reading some reviews of the episode, one review in particular, I believe it was the New York Times, had a much more, I don't want to say complex, because it's not complex, but they looked at the title a lot more deeply than I did originally. I'm going to read, it's only like a couple of sentences, what the New York Times said about the title of the episode. It says, the title, What It Takes, is likely a reference to Richard Ben Cramer's nonfiction account of the 1988 U.S. presidential race, in which he examined in depth the biographies and the campaigns of 2 Republicans and 4 Democrats, considering what drove these men to run. The book explores the gulf that often opens up between the candidates' impressive credentials and how they sell themselves to voters and the media. I think that final sentence really nails what happens here, particularly when you look at Roman's conversation with the guy that he was endorsing. And I'll get to that. I'll get to the specifics of that a little bit later. But the idea of how you portray yourself versus how you really are as a politician is definitely at play in this episode. I looked at it as in a much more basic way, and it could be both things actually, but I just looked at it in a way of family members doing what it takes in order to get what they want. So like you see a lot of that with Kendall, you see a lot of that with Tom, you see a lot of that with Shiv, and I'll get to all those things later, but I looked at it a lot more basic than that, than this New York Times writer did, but that's why I'm here on YouTube with like 7.5 people watching this, and this and that person writes for the New York Times. But yeah, I still think that's a very interesting title if it actually is meant to play off of that book, because I think we definitely see that at play here, and that's one of those things that when you really start paying close attention to politics, as I've paid attention to politics since before I could vote. So those are the kinds of things that you do start to observe. Like, is this person really, not even are they really who they say they are, but you look at what they say on the campaign trail, and then once they get elected, if they get elected, how they then handle the promises that they made when they were campaigning, how they change, even just on how they present themselves on television as whatever title that they have versus how they were before they had that title. So I thought that was a really interesting take on the title, and probably a lot more accurate than my fucking basic ass take. Anyway, a lot of this episode focuses on the Roys figuring out who they want to endorse to be the next Republican nominee for president. And there's an interesting kind of sequence where some woman is talking to Logan. I believe she's maybe she's in some way related to the vice president, who is Dave Boyer. And she gives Logan shit for making the raisin not run again. And she basically says, the nominee will be decided at the convention, but we should probably make that decision here first. And I think that the show putting it out there that the rich and powerful decide who's going to run for these positions of power, and in a way who is going to win based upon their actions, and not us, the voter. I wonder if the show thinks that's supposed to be a shocking revelation to us. And it probably is, but like I just mentioned earlier, I've been following politics for more than half my life, and that's not surprising to me at all. So I'm just like, okay, but I wonder if the show felt like they were kind of like really putting some heavy shit out there. And I also wonder if viewers looked at that like, man, I wonder if that's really how it is. That's definitely how it is. But I thought that was an interesting moment right there. So each of the main Roys at play here has a different person who they want to back for the position, and they essentially hashed it out over the course of this episode. Logan starts off wanting to back the vice president, Dave Boyer. They don't see eye to eye on how Logan wants to handle tech. And then they introduce this fucking tongue thing that this guy does where he licks his lips. And what I love about that, there's 2 things I love about this. The first being, it makes me wonder what was in the script versus what this actor actually did. Like, did they just put like licks his lips creepily or something like that, and he came up with that. Like, whatever it was, that was the perfect thing. Because if you think, yeah, this guy running for president does this weird thing where he licks his lips, you think, oh, that's not that big deal. It's kind of dumb. But then when I saw it, I was like, yeah, this motherfucker can't be president doing that shit, man. This shit was so weird. And then the second thing I liked about it was that it was so well done that in the future, I mean, not in the future, but later in the episode, when we see this guy again, now we're looking for it. And like that, like the show's not pointing it out. They're not telling you, like, you know, they're not calling it to your attention, but they did such a great job when they presented it that every time I saw that guy after, I was looking for it. And I thought that was really smart on the show's part to really loop the audience in on this lip licking thing. But oh man, that was so fun. Like, I was crying laughing because I'm like, no, he can't be president doing that shit. Shiv wants to back a guy named Rick Salgado. I think he's Mexican. And this is the guy that she supports. She hates the other options because you remember Shiv is on a different vibe politically than the rest of her family. Like, she's a little bit more like on the Greg level of politicians. Like, she wants good people in there, and Roman and Logan just kind of want far right conservatives that they can kind of like use and control, and they don't really care what these people are going to do or not do for the country, whereas Shiv does. And she's supporting this Salgado guy, and in a couple of the reviews I read, I don't think this aspect of it was played up. Well, I can't say play up enough because I didn't read a single article that talked about it. But this guy makes a play at Shiv and essentially says, you know, if you and your father help me get elected, I'll then put your father in jail and make you CEO. I feel like, given what we've seen with Shiv to this point, she takes that deal. Like, so we've already seen her. She's already willingly sacrificing Tom. More on that in a moment. We also know that now at the end, by the end of this episode, which again, I'll talk about this in a moment as well, Shiv has every reason to not fuck with Logan anymore. So I feel like what we've learned about Shiv throughout this point, the idea of her throwing her father under the bus to become CEO herself, we know that she cares about being CEO probably more than anyone else in the family does, including Kendall. She cares more about that. And we also see she doesn't care about throwing family under the bus and putting them in jail if it will help her. Like, I feel like Shiv came out of this episode looking really bad in multiple ways. It's been a bad couple of episodes for Shiv, actually, but more on that later. And then Roman wants this guy, Jared Menken. I found everything involving this Menken guy and Roman to be pretty interesting. For one, I had this in my thoughts, but I'm going to throw it out there now. Did anyone else feel like there was like a weird sexual tension there? Like, they've never established Roman as, I mean, well, we know he had the thing with Jerry going on, but I feel like there hasn't been a clear kind of like, I don't want to say explanation because you don't need one, but I feel like Roman's sexuality is very still much open to interpretation. And I don't feel like it is necessarily out of Roman's character to actually been flirting with this guy. And this guy kind of seemed to be flirting with Roman to me. Maybe I'm tripping and I read too much into it. I was wasted at the time anyway, so who knows? But so Roman and Menken are having this conversation. And I feel like Roman's trying to get the same kind of information, the same kind of, making the same kind of play that I was mentioning at the beginning when I was reading the New York Times interpretation of the title. The whole concept of how a politician really is versus how they present themselves. And I feel like Roman's trying to get a feel for that. Is like, okay, he presents himself as like a kind of extreme kind of guy. And we kind of need that at the forefront of what we're doing. But also, like, are you really like that? He says something like, are you like a guy named H? I'm assuming that's supposed to be Hitler. And it's a very interesting layered conversation. And I felt at the time that Menken was presenting himself poorly. Like, I felt like Roman kind of wanted him to not be as extreme as he was. And I thought that he was. Like, he was showing me like a whole lot of like veiled racism and shit like that. But Roman ultimately ended up being sold on this guy. And he makes a strong case for him later. And I'll talk about that in a moment. And then lastly, Connor is there, backing Connor, of course. And interestingly enough, I really like how the conversation about Connor shifts from them kind of like jokingly considering it to them seriously considering it. And from my perspective as a viewer, I feel like, why would they not want Connor in that position? Like, obviously Connor's kind of a fuck off, and it's like, he's weird. Like, do you really want him to be president? Like, no, it's like, whatever, Connor. But from their perspective, why would you not want Connor there? Because even if Connor is like kind of a weirdo, kind of a fuck up or whatever, you could control Connor, and you got a family member in the highest position in the world. Like, I don't see why they wouldn't want that. But Connor, they actually have a conversation about Connor, and Shiv, I think it was, makes a pretty good case for Connor. And I think Connor having Connor backing Connor is kind of smart. But what do I know, right? So a couple other things that I liked about this episode. Well, there's a lot of things I liked about this episode. I thought it was a great episode. But I like the conversation between Shiv and Tom that kind of like starts off with wine, where like this whole episode, Tom is like consuming things of lesser quality than he's accustomed to kind of like build him, to kind of like prepare himself for prison. Like, okay, so now he's drinking wine where you got a screw off top to prepare himself for like the toilet wine later. And then he's eating at a diner that looks like a fucking Denny's. And he's like, I heard this is close to prison food. Like, Tom is so weird, man. But that conversation evolves into Tom, again, kind of, stating his concerns about going to prison. And Shiv is at this point completely like, I'm tired of hearing it. Like, you stop bitching about going to prison. And she goes, I don't know what to say, Tom. And again, I like I've said early in the season, like, Shiv has shown herself to have no issue with this. She continuously says, I don't know what to say. And at no point has she said, don't do this. Like, Tom didn't do anything wrong. He just took over this position. Like, this is a complete coincidence that Tom is like the head of ATN, and then this shit comes out after the fact. Tom didn't know about this when he took this role. So like, Tom kind of fell into this. He offers himself up because he's Tom, and he just wants to just suck up to Logan so bad. And now he's in this position, and his wife won't even tell him to not do it because she is so thirsty for power. And it's incredible how Shiv, at least from my perspective, Shiv's like a complete piece of shit to me at this point. Like, she is fully willing to let Tom go to jail for no reason and thinks this is the ideal solution, won't talk him out of it, and then bitches at him for talking about it so much. Like, why are you always complaining about prison? Like, what the fuck? Oh, man. But I love how that scene evolved from like the wine conversation, which was incredibly uppity and boring, to into this whole situation with Shiv and Tom that I'm excited about, because I feel like at some point Tom is gonna have a blow up on somebody. Like, Tom's gonna go off, and whenever that happens, it's gonna be epic, because this show has done an incredible job this season of setting that up and building toward it. Tom's inevitable break is gonna be incredible, and I can't wait for it. Oh, so another thing that I liked, and this is about Tom. There's a lot of stuff actually I liked about this episode involving Tom. Greg actually comes up to meet with Tom, and essentially now Tom is like kind of like they're calling him this Christmas tree. Everyone's kind of like hanging their charges on him, like, so it's like, hey, Tom, why don't you already going, so why don't you handle this? He's already got enough shit that he's dealing with, and now Greg actually has the gall to come up and ask him to take some of his charges and shit. Like, man. And then Tom agrees to it. It's such a tough scene to watch, really, because it's like, man, Greg's kind of ruthless here to be asking this, to be perfectly honest. And then what was the other thing? Well, I know what the other thing was, but I want to see if there's anything before that. Yeah. So the last thing about Tom that I want to talk about is I love the meeting that he has with Kendall. It's again, like I say about every great moment in this show, it's very layered. And Kendall asked Tom to essentially come to his side, which, again, surprise, surprise, right? Who's surprised by that? Kendall, I'll talk about Kendall in a moment. So we now know that Kendall doesn't have a strong case. And he essentially asked Tom to sign off on saying that nothing happens without Logan's approval. And Tom thinks about it. He says no. And I like that. I like that moment, because we know that Kendall is worried about the state of his case. So we could see him, like, he's trying to play like he's doing Tom a favor, but he wants Tom's help. We know that. Tom doesn't. Tom turns it down. And then my favorite line of the episode, and one of my favorite lines of probably of this season, I'm going to read it verbatim. So they have Kendall makes the offer to Tom, and Tom says, having been around a bit, my hunch is that you're going to get fucked because I've seen you get fucked a lot, and I've never seen Logan get fucked once. I love that line. Like, there's like truth into it. It's a cold ass line. Like, that was a dope scene. So really enjoyed that. And as far as Kendall goes, Kendall opens up the episode being kind of a dick to Lisa. He's doing this best lawyer in town with the air quotes. He says, let's try harder to her after she essentially keeps it real with him. Says, your case isn't that solid. This isn't a slam dunk. There's a lot of stuff missing here that would probably help us out. She talks about how he completely dropped the ball when he met with the government people to kind of like discuss what he had. It's interesting that the show doesn't actually show us the conversation, which I think is smart, because now once we leave out of it, we hear, Lisa essentially kind of saying like, well, that wasn't so bad. And then Kendall goes, no, it's okay. You can say it didn't go well. And I think it's interesting to hear them talk about how it didn't go well, as opposed to actually seeing it not go well. And because there's a part of it that makes you wonder, like, just how bad was it? And that's a little bit more intriguing than if you actually saw it to wonder how bad it was. But she lays into him kind of like, hey, these are all the ways that you fucked up. And then later, he tells the rest of his people there that he's fired her. I think he said she was a toxic person or something like that. Like, wow, yeah, that truthful toxicity, right? But Kendall's in a bad way, man. He's in bad shape. And I like that now Kendall seems to almost have exhausted all of his options. But I think what's going to happen is that Shiv is going to come to his rescue inadvertently. So when I said Shiv took a few L's in this episode, it wasn't just the conversation with Tom where I'm just like, oh, fuck Shiv, man. She's going to let this guy go to jail for no reason. It was also the situation at the end. So at the very end of the episode, Roman essentially lays out a great case for his guy, Mencken. And Logan looks impressed. He looks back at the assistant, I think her name's Carrie, who they had a whole thing earlier in the episode about the idea of whether or not they're fucking. And like, his kids think he's fucking everybody. But they do kind of like exchange glances, and they both seem impressed with Roman's pitch for this Mencken guy. And they essentially agree to back Mencken. And they're all posing for a picture. And we hear Logan tell Roman that he did a good job this weekend. And then he tells Shiv to get in the picture. And Shiv says, no, I'm not going to get in the picture with this fucking guy. Absolutely not. And Logan says, yes, you are. And she goes, well, I'll get in the picture, but I'm not going to stand right next to him. And I love how that was Shiv thinking that she's trying to save face here. Like, oh, I'll take the picture, but I'm not going to stand next to him. You completely folded to your father's will. There is no saving face here. You caved in like a whole ass earthquake, avalanche, or whatever. You caved in and completely lost your backbone. And the fact that she thought that she was saving face almost kind of made it even more sad. Like, you really thought that you were doing something by saying, I'm not going to stand next to him. So now we have her having been humiliated multiple times by Logan in front of others. And it makes me wonder now, is Shiv going to go back to Kendall again? Because she kind of went to him after the one time. Is she going to go back again? Who knows? So really interested to see what happens there as well. So I'm going to wrap up with a couple of thoughts. My first one was already about if Roman and Mencken were kind of flirting with each other. Let me know what you think about that. I like that Roman referenced the Overton window. Like, I wouldn't think that I literally thought in my head at that moment, like, how does Roman know what the Overton window is? And then Shiv goes, I'm surprised you know what that means. I thought that was kind of cool. Also noticed in the scene that Roman has Blanton's, so he has good taste in bourbon. There's a lot of people that say that Blanton's is overrated. I don't think Blanton's is overrated at all if you can get it at the actual retail price. The problem is that it's so hard to get your hands on that it's like $60 retail, but if you can find it somewhere, somebody might be charging like $200 for it. Is it worth $200? Absolutely not. But is it worth $60? Yup. So Roman has good taste in bourbon. I wonder what was the significance of, well, I don't want to say what was the significance, but I wonder what the long-term, I don't want to say effects, but like the long-term reactions are going to be to finding out that their mother is getting remarried. Because I feel like that's kind of a big deal, but it was kind of just, they just kind of like sprinkled it in a little bit in this episode. And I feel like there's going to be some ramifications from that going forward. I don't know what, but I feel like there will be. I love when Greg, I love when Greg was told that he could, like when he was in the room when they were discussing the vice president thing, I mean, when they were discussing who they wanted to back for president, Greg is told essentially that he can vote with everybody else. And Greg says something like, well, I kind of feel like I have a bigger vote in here. And I'm like, okay, Greg. Greg knows what's up. And then I also loved this line that I wrote down. I'm going to just read it. So when he says, because of my physical length, I could be a target for all kinds of misadventure. When he's talking about going to prison. Like, Greg is just awesome. And there were a ton of funny lines in this episode, by the way. I don't have much time to talk about them because I want to talk about the things that are more important than the show's humor. But the show continues to be funny each and every week with some really great lines. I can't even remember the context right now, but Tom said the Tampa Bay Buccaneers at some point. I don't know where that came from. That was hilarious. So, really great episode. I loved all the arguing about who they should be backing for president. It got personal at some points. I loved how the angles that Roman played, how hard Roman worked to find out if this guy Mencken would work out for them, how good of a job he did at selling this guy to Logan, and then how Logan reacted towards Shiv again at the end of this episode. Like, he's burning bridges with Shiv, and he needs to not be doing that. But I loved all that stuff. I loved everything that happened with Tom in this episode. Lots of great lines from Greg and everyone. So another great episode. This show continues to roll on and be probably the best show on television. So really excited to see what happens. And I'll see you guys next week for episode 7. Peace.